Welcome back to another Rust and Trust production. We'll be doing a full time-lapse build of Frog's Fiat G.55 single-seat fighter. This kit has a few sprues, and there was unfortunately some injector sink marks in the nose cone and on the landing gear covers. There was minimal flash, and this is pretty good for an old kit. Some parts had fallen off the sprue. The canopy wasn't that clear, and it was pretty thick as well. Box art was really nice, and it depicted just two of the aircraft in flight. I started by cutting out the parts for the propeller and test fitting them together. It wasn't that good a fit, unfortunately, but with a bit of sand in it fitted, and then I put some filler on the nose cone. I then assembled the bombs for the bottom of the aircraft using Tamiya extra thin quick setting cement, and then cut out the parts for the landing gear. Used my Dremel as a lathe to remove flash evenly using a file and X-Acto knife. Used Tamiya XF4 yellow green for all the cockpit. The cockpit was just made up of half a chair on either side, so they came together to form a chair, and there was a bit of a seam, so I had to actually use filler inside the aircraft. I then mixed it with some Humbrol acrylic thinner, which has drying retardant in it, so it's self-level on the second coat, making a nice smooth finish. Did not tell you to paint it yellow, however I found from reference photos it was. I then went about assembling the propeller. Unfortunately, the pin that went into the back of the propeller didn't fit very well. I then drilled the hole in the air intake because it was just solid. I had to glue together the two wings, but unfortunately I had to take them apart later on. You'll see why. I then used Dwyer's X 2.0 scratch remover and cleaned up the canopy with a cotton bud and some of the scratch remover. I then taped I glued the fuselage together using Revel contactor. I find this is a stronger cement. Used rubber bands to do this. Then used filler to fill the gaps. There's quite a big gap at the front near the air intake. And then use liquid poly mixed with strip styrene to form a sort of gloopy mixture that was much stronger than the original cement, allowing me to fill in smaller, bigger gaps. I then had to rip apart the wings because I realised that I hadn't actually drilled the holes for the bombs. I had to clean up some of the plastic where it had been burned away, then I re-cemented them back together. Used clothes pegs to hold them together. I then went about masking the canopy. I used Tamiya 6mm masking tape for this. I used a cocktail stick to burnish the edges so I could see the well moulded canopy frames. Unfortunately, the three windows in the top were so small I couldn't use tape because there were quite rounded edges on the frames. So I used some Humbrol Mastrol. Fine brushes get pretty clogged up with this stuff. It will wash off with a brush, but after it's dried it won't. Here you can see me applying it. Applied some filler to the fronts of the wings so the wings were nice and even. And then I sanded down the fuselage first using 180 grit and 1000 grit, both from Tamiya. I then remade the raised panellings using that liquid poly and plasticard mix again. Unfortunately, it didn't work as well as I expected, so I wouldn't recommend doing this. You'd rather want to rescribe them, so at least you've got a nice neat panelline instead of a horrible mismoulded raised one. Then glued the wings on using some more extra thin quick setting. One thing you have to watch out about using this glue is it dries really quickly. We then cut to real time. You can see how fast I actually work, which is actually pretty slowly. This is me attaching the rear stabilizers. These were a good fit and did not need any glue, although they did have a little minimal amount of flash going around them. But I have seen worse. For example, my video on the A model J2M3 Raiden, it had really thick flash and there was lots of it. You can go check that out. You can also subscribe just not to miss anything. Test fit them first. And the good thing about extras in cement is you can put stuff in place then glue them, because if you spill any glue on the model, you just leave it and it'll self-level and it won't make any mark. It might make it slightly shinier in that spot, but that won't affect it after it's been painted. We're back in time lapse, we just put some more glue on them. Then sanded down the wing seams. These did need a bit of filler, maybe a millimeter gap on each side, which is quite a large gap, but the filler managed to fill it all up. Again, I used 180 and 1000 grit, and at the end I used a bit of water and 1000 grit to get it a bit smoother. Then used micro crystal clear to glue on the canopy. There were some large gaps, but I think that was to do with me because I sanded down the insides of the cockpit, making a bigger gap there. And crystal clear filled the gaps perfectly. And then restriped the panel lines using the modified scalpel. Then attached a small light, I believe it was, to the bottom of the aircraft. Then used silver paint to paint up the landing gear legs because I was waiting for the glue to harden on the canopy. And also at this point my airbrush was broken. Nothing to do with the airbrush, just tightened the nozzle in the end too tightly and it snapped off. I pre-shaded it, then I used Tamiya XF19 Sky Grey for the whole underside. The pre-shading really showed through, as you'll be able to see at the end. A good idea is to, like, if you're painting, say, the landing gear doors, just to stick them on a bit of blue tack and that'll hold them in place so you don't get paint all over you. Then used a tan colour that I mixed myself for the top. I have 5 different paints and I painted all the splodges on. This was Tamiya XF11 JN Green. I would really recommend you using Tamiya paints through an airbrush, but they do take quite a lot of skill to paint them with a brush. I did actually paint them with a brush on my Hunting Personal Jet Provost T3, but I had to use quite a lot of drying retardant in there. And then used yellow green, 90% thinner to 10% paint, because I wasn't happy with the tan colour. I thought it'd be more yellow, so I just lightly blasted it over, which did lighten the spots, but it did work in the end very well. Then unmasked the bottom. I used Tamiya 6mm masking tape, which would come into contact with the paint, and for the large areas just used duck masking tape. And then painted the bombs with JN green. I mixed in a bit of yellow because obviously the green on the aircraft would have been lightened slightly by using the yellow. Then painted it Humbrol 35 gloss varnish. This is to prepare it for the decals, as a gloss varnish helps them adhere and avoid silvering. Humbrol acrylic paints aren't that good, but they worked well for this purpose. I then used the decals and applied them to the model. I used micro set and saw. These decals were almost 40 years old, but they worked to treat. They were nice and thin and conformed well to the model, without any ripping. You have to watch out, the markings on the top and bottom are different. I thought they were both the same, but turned out one was clear and one was white. I painted the exhaust, and then I painted the propeller, guns and tyres black, Revel 08. I did accidentally melt one of the propeller blades, but it was unseen after I had to twist it back. And then I applied the landing gear with just Pound World super glue. This works really well. The landing gear doors had to be cut down slightly. It didn't mention it in the instruction, but there was a small indentation line where it should have been cut. Then used Revel aluminium to paint the tail wheel as well as black for the tyre. Whilst I had the fine brush out, I decided to do some chipping on the aircraft along the walkways and on the propeller blades. Then attached the bombs using some more extra thin cement. Then tried the antenna, stuck it to the model. And then painted the, what was it? I can't remember what I put in there. And then I flat cleared it with Tamiya XF86. This stuff can only be airbrushed, as it will fog the paint. I unfortunately did this on a P40, the Airfix on the Desert Paint Stream. I then applied some weathering powders to create gun streaks and exhaust staining, and a bit of rust on the exhausts themselves. These weathering powders are just cheap ones I picked up at Model Show about 5 years ago. And I made some stretch sprue. This is for the antenna wire. I find it works really well. You can buy Easy Line, which is a stretchy version of stretch sprue, in terms of the wee reel, so you can knock it and stuff. But I just use stretch sprue as it's easier. And then took off the canopy masks. It's a bad angle. I do apologise for this. They all worked pretty well, apart from one frame line on the top, which I had to repaint by mixing some tan and then finish the model. This model was really good. I would recommend it for everybody, and it represents a good Fiat G.55 fighter.